Hi, this is Erica with Launching Legacies. Welcome to our daily devotional. Today we're continuing our devotional series on understanding our identity. Remember, we're looking at identity, personhood, and purpose. So today we're going to actually go into looking at identity as something that can be fractured and how we can reshape it. So if you'll direct your attention to this image here, you'll see the reminder of the foundation is the identity, and then the house is shaped is the personhood, and then the overarching banner is purpose. So let's kind of go back to identity and talk about how identity can be fractured and what that means. So when I work with a lot of clients, we get into an area in which we realize that identity is damaged, and there's some telltale signs that identity is damaged or wounded or needs to be repaired in some regard. One of those is that the person is confusing identity with personhood or purpose. That's one of the biggest signs that the identity needs to be developed or is impaired in some way. And this happens because most of the time when we're looking at identity, where the foundation says, okay, we're children of God, and that in itself should be enough. But if it's not enough, then we'll look for other things to attach ourselves to make ourselves feel more valuable, more important, or more qualified to be who we are, where we are, or in the relationships that we're in. We need more than just being God's child. And so that tells us that there's a fracture in the identity, the foundation of who we are, because being a child of God is indeed enough, right? The fact that God has made us and grafted us into the kingdom, because he's adopted us, because he calls us children, because he says that he will leave the 99 to search for that one, meaning he values us and he puts us on in such high regard, that in and of itself is sufficient. It's enough to say I'm enough, right? That because God has loved me, he created me, he designed me, I'm uniquely his. That's enough to sustain my direction, my life, my personhood. Whatever comes after my identity is good, because God has, from the foundation, established me in him, right? I'm created in his likeness. I'm created in his image. And so my identity as a child of God is valuable. When that's not true, when people are unable to just agree that because I'm a child of God, I'm enough, then that usually represents what we call a crack in the foundation. And so we have to go back and realize or identify what the lies are that this person has believed that has made their identity in Christ, their identity as a child of God, not be enough. And so what we start to do is we start to uncover, we start to excavate. It's just like a house. Remember, we talked about renovating the house in personhood and how it's dynamic and changing, and how the foundation actually stays the same. And so most homes, when the foundation is damaged, then there's a big work. And so many times it's a hassle that people are not willing to take on, right? Because the foundational issue means that there is no stability for holding the house. And that's the same when we come to personalities or relationships, or even in just a person's life. If their foundation, their identity is shaky, if being a child of God is not enough, if recognizing that God's uniqueness has been established in them is not enough, then their whole life starts to be, wibbly wobbly. And if a foundation is damaged, you'll notice if you're in a house that doesn't have a sturdy foundation, then that house begins to creak and move. The ground might slide in certain directions. It can't be balanced because this foundation is off. And so we see that those lives begin to slide in unique ways, and that demonstrates, okay, there's something wrong here. They don't find themselves to be good enough because they are a child of God. They don't find themselves to be good enough because they're uniquely made in the image of God. What does this mean about what they think about God? So the question always goes back to the Creator. He's the establisher. He's the one that put things in place. And so we find ourselves not able to feel good enough just because we're a child of God. If we're not able to find ourselves good enough because we're uniquely made in his image and his likeness, then that's a reflection of how we feel about God. And now some people don't want to hear that. They're not interested in having conversations about things like resentment toward God for the things things that have gone wrong in their lives, or bitterness because they feel like God should have given them something that they didn't get, or just anger towards God for the unexplained or under the places in their life that they just don't understand. Oftentimes people are not willing to discuss it, but it's demonstrated in the leaning house, right? It's demonstrated in an unstable type of life that cannot be situated without looking at outside sources. And so sometimes when we have this foundational issue, I find that there are many differences, but sometimes they look for relationship to provide the stability that God has provided in his creation of us in his image, right? He created us in his image, and that is our solid. We're made in his likeness, and that is our solid foundation. But when that foundation is cracked and we don't trust God, when we are unwilling to receive the love that God is trying to offer us, or if we have a fault in our opinion toward God, we have a fault with him, we have an issue that we want to take up with him, what often happens is we gravitate to other things to create that stability that God has tried to create in shaping and forming us in his identity. And so then we start to attract things to give us false identities or fake ways to become a part of or to be enough. And so it's like, oh, I never felt understood, and so I gravitated to this because these people understood me, or because this person understood me. And so then we find codependency is something that's common when our foundation is broken. We find ourselves finding our identity and our fullness of who we are in things other than God. If it's people, if it's things, if it's substances, if it's anything other than God, then there's a problem, because he is the foundation of us. He is our maker. It's through his development and his creation of us that our identity stands firm. But when we see that shaking, we start to gravitate to anything that provides us with an idea of stability, and often that's in faulty relationships with people or with things. And so what do we realize we need to do is do what we do to houses when their foundation is damaged. We have to go around the foundation. If the foundation is non-existent, then the house has to be destroyed and rebuilt again, right? Because there's no foundation. I remember I watched this show. It was one of these home improvement shows, and they had a foundation that was only a few inches thick. So it was more like a sidewalk than a foundation, and the whole house was on these few inches. That's not a foundation, right? A foundation needs to be dug into the ground. It needs to have a cornerstone. It needs to have these blocks to set it, and it has to be framed out. It has to be dug in so that if something comes to shake the house, if something comes against the house, it's able to continue to stand. And so this house that had this small foundation, this little tiny foundation, of course it was cracked because the earth shifts, through earthquakes or different natural disasters. It was shaken and it was cracked, and the house was leaning and it was damaged, and the people who bought the house realized, you know what, we can't even do anything with this. This is not a foundation. So the whole house has to be torn down. And so really what they had bought was land, because everything had to be reestablished. And so they ended up working it out in the show. But I thought to myself, how common is it that we have built a house or built a life on a faulty foundation, on something that is not real, is not sincere, is not dug deep enough, is not established in the truth of who we are. And we just build and build and build, and sometimes we live in that house until the house falls down on us, and we can't figure out why things are so disturbed. And if we go back to the foundation, we find the answer. That we need to know and love and value who God is in order to understand true life in his image, because we were created in his image and in his likeness. So if we are having trouble, we got to go back to him, back to our foundation. We need to learn to rest in him. We need to learn to trust his love. We need to learn to be able to receive it. We need to get peace in that place. And so really what it does is it sets an atmosphere in which we, as people who are always striving towards wellness, right, who are always progressing in a direction of wellness, when we find ourselves unwell, we can almost always go back to the foundation. We say, wait a minute, I was created in the image of God. He knows me. He understands me. He developed me. He shaped me. Let me go back to him as a source of truth, as a source of direction. I am what he says that I am, right? I can do what he says I can do, right? If he says it, if he's established it in there, then it holds up, right? It holds up the house. The integrity of my house, of my life, is good if it's found solidly in him. But if I struggle in this place of really knowing whose I am, then I'm going to struggle with knowing who I am. If I need other people and I need other things in order to feel comfortable, then I'm going to have a problem, because those things will always fall short, because in the establishment of creation, in the establishment of our lives, those things were not there. The word even says that God knew us. He shaped us and formed us within our mother's womb. Our mothers didn't know what we were looking like, and God knew, right? Our mothers, whom we were birthed out of their bodies, couldn't make decisions about how we would sound, what we would look like, what kind of voice we would have, or what kind of body type we would have. Our mothers couldn't decide what color our hair would be, but God knew. And so he is our foundation, and we look at him as our father, and we establish him as the voice of truth, but he's also the image in which we were created in, right? And so he is the beginning. And so when we struggle and we're trying to fit other people into a place that belongs to God, we'll always find our foundation faulty. And so here goes the question for you as we're talking about this image, and we're recognizing that we are children of God and that has to be solid. The question for you is this: how solid is your foundation? Does it trouble you for me to say to you that before you are any race or any gender, you are a child of God? Does it trouble you for me to say before any relationship comes into play, a husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, daughter, son, mother, child, whatever, before any of those relationships comes in, you are a child of God? Does it trouble you to say, if you're nothing else, if you do nothing else but be a child of God, you can be fulfilled in just that, if that's the will of God concerning you? If that makes you uncomfortable, if you can't rest there, if you can't just say, I am good enough because I'm created in God's image, then it's time for us to excavate the foundation. Look on what you are establishing your life on. Look at what principles and whose image you have found yourself to really believe you're created in. Even if you have a concept of God, are you really understanding that you were created in his image? Are you really understanding you're created in his likeness? Or are you always believing you are not enough, needing a job, needing an education, needing a relationship in order to be more than what you are? Because if you struggle with these things, then this is not an issue of the house, the personhood. This is an issue of the foundation. It's not about finding a job that gives you purpose, because I hear that all the time. It's not about finding a position in life or a relationship that makes you fulfilled. That's not what this is. If you struggle with not being good enough, you struggle with a foundational issue of you and your creator. And really, when you say that you are not good enough, when we say that we are not good enough, we are saying, God, you are not good enough. What you did is not enough. And I know it sounds kind of harsh and maybe it seems extreme to you, but it's the truth. We were created in his image, and in his image we have been made. And so if we look at him and say we are not good enough, we are looking at him and saying he is not good enough. And there's something to it. And if that's you, it's okay. Because you need to be honest about where you are. Because if you can't be honest about where you are, you can never progress to understanding really how he has created you with a definite purpose. It's going to be very difficult for you to accept any part of who you are if you can't get this foundational concept down. So I want to encourage you to pray about this. And I want to let you know that I'm praying for you. I'm praying that this place in you, any place that says that you're not good enough would be turned around, would be excavated, would be made strong where it's been weak, and that you would be encouraged to trust Him, to show you why indeed you are good enough, and why in His image is the image that you need to be made in, and why that image is really all we need to seek after, His face, knowing Him and understanding that if He did the work, He did it right, and there's no question to that. I'm praying for you. I hope you'll join us again tomorrow for another devotional, and until then,